What if Vladimir Putin died tomorrow? Not next year, not after stepping down. Tomorrow. No warning, no transition. Just a breaking alert on every screen. Russian President Vladimir Putin dead. In 1 second, the man who ruled Russia for over 2 decades, gone. And the world? It wouldn't celebrate. It would panic. Because Putin isn't just a leader, he's the system. And when the system dies with the man who built it, what follows is chaos. The first hours would be pure confusion. The Kremlin would go silent, no statements, no explanations. Russian TV would switch to patriotic music. Top officials would vanish behind closed doors. The people would sense the truth before hearing it. Their eternal leader? Gone. Some would mourn. Others would whisper that he was poisoned, betrayed, maybe even removed. In a country built on secrecy and paranoia, truth would be the first casualty. And on the streets of Moscow, fear would spread faster than news. Because when the man who promised order disappears, every Russian knows what comes next. Disorder. Inside the Kremlin, panic. Putin's entire government exists because of loyalty to him. Without him, no one knows who's truly in charge. The prime minister would act as interim leader, but behind the scenes, generals, intelligence chiefs, and oligarchs would be plotting. Each of them knows the first one to control Moscow controls the nation. There's no trust, no unity, no clear successor. Russia would become a chessboard of betrayal, assassinations, secret alliances, silenced rivals, all in a matter of days. The empire Putin rebuilt through fear could crumble under the same fear that once held it together. Then comes the danger no one wants to talk about: Russia's nuclear arsenal. Thousands of warheads. But who commands them now? Who gives the launch codes? Who has control of the generals? The military would split, some swearing loyalty to Putin's memory, others obeying new voices trying to seize power. In that confusion, even a single misunderstanding could trigger disaster. A radar blip, a false signal, one wrong order, and the world faces its worst nightmare. For the first time since the Cold War, the world would be one mistake away from nuclear escalation. And what about the war in Ukraine? To some, Putin's death would look like an opportunity, a chance for peace. But history doesn't work that cleanly. Hardliners in Moscow might demand revenge, claiming the West killed their leader. They could launch more attacks, not to win, but to prove strength, to show the world Russia still has teeth. Ukraine might celebrate too soon, only to find that wars rarely end just because one man does. The chaos in Moscow could spill across borders. A desperate army, uncertain command, weapons scattered, nuclear bases on alert. That's not peace. That's a storm waiting to break. Meanwhile, the Russian people would be trapped in silence. They've been told for 20 years that Putin is the protector, the wall between them and the West, between order and collapse. And now that wall is gone. Some would cry, some would rage, and some, quietly, would hope it's the beginning of freedom. But freedom isn't born overnight. Without Putin, the oligarchs fight for power, regional leaders demand independence, and the giant called Russia begins to split at its seams. It would be like watching an empire implode in slow motion, from the inside out. And the world? Terrified. NATO would go on high alert. The US and Europe would freeze, waiting to see who takes control. Stock markets would crash. Oil prices would skyrocket. China would move in fast, pretending to help stabilize while quietly taking everything it can. The balance of power would shift overnight, and the world would realize how fragile peace really is, when one man's heartbeat controls so many triggers. But here's the darkest part. Putin's death wouldn't end his story. It would immortalize it. To his loyalists, he'd become a saint, a hero murdered by the West, a myth used to justify even more aggression. Statues would rise, songs would be written, and the next dictator would use his ghost as a weapon. Because history proves one thing. When men like Putin die suddenly, their shadow doesn't disappear. It grows. So what if Vladimir Putin died tomorrow? Would the world finally breathe in relief, or hold its breath for something worse? Sometimes the end of one man's rule isn't peace. It's the beginning of the storm he left behind. This is World Leaders, where we ask the questions the world is too afraid to answer. Subscribe if you want to know what happens next.